Hello everyone, Ryan Kurczak here of Asheville Vedic Astrology. In this video we're going to discuss my views on astrology and what to expect when we'll have a session together. You've probably found this video either by being referred to Asheville Vedic Astrology by a friend or by another client. Maybe you found the videos through YouTube, the youtube.com/Ryan's Vedic Astrology channel, or maybe you've read some of my books, The Art and Science of Vedic Astrology, Volume 1, Volume 2, or a Kriya Yoga book. But however you found me, I really would like to explain to you what is my vision of astrology and how do I do my work. That way you know who you are getting a session with. Now, what I'm about to describe, keep an open mind. If you find that you resonate with my approach, that you feel that I could be of service to you based on the way I look at and perceive and utilize astrology, then feel free to continue with our emailing of setting up a session or finding an astrologer that's right for you. If not, don't worry about it. There's plenty of astrologers in the world, Vedic, Western, Mayan, and others, so I'm sure you can find someone that'll best suit your needs. So I want to begin by stating that as an astrologer, my main focus, my main goal is that of helping an individual to know who they are, to focus on self-knowledge. And that takes precedence over making predictions for people. That takes precedence over telling anyone how they should live their life. My goal is to share what does the chart indicate based on your past habits and tendencies, your past karmas, and how can you work with that moving forward into the future. And why do I approach it this way? Well, I didn't start practicing astrology. I found astrology through yoga and meditation. So at first I was a yogi, I was a meditator. And approaching life from that perspective has never been a fatalistic thing for me. So when I got into astrology, I wanted to use it as a tool to help myself, to help others plan their life and to understand who they are and what do they realistically need to do to either make peace with themselves, to understand their place within the world, or to properly guide their course, their direction, by understanding the trends that astrology can share. So this is how I approach astrology. Some of you know that my waiting list is rather long. As of summer of 2015, it's usually between about 3 to 4 months out, and even then there are usually about 30 to 50 people that are on another list that I haven't even scheduled yet. So you do need to be patient with scheduling these sessions, and that's as it should be with the way I like to work with an individual, because as I've said in a few videos, I'm not an urgent care astrologer, meaning that if you want to understand yourself and think long term to direct your destiny or try to work with your destiny or gain greater self-awareness, well, this is more of a long-term thing and we've got plenty of time. If you're trying to launch a business or plan a marriage, or if you have a serious health issue that you're working out, it may be that I can look at your chart very quickly and give you some advice, but more often than not that will not be the case. So as I mentioned, I'm not an urgent care astrologer. Now, whenever someone first contacts me, I like to know what their goals and expectations are astrologically. And why do I do this? Because it helps me understand, is the client, you, that I'm going to work with, do we share a similar vision? Do we share a similar direction? Do we share a similar mission, if you will? I don't like to be fatalistic, as I've mentioned. I like to help you consider where have you come from, meaning how have you acted in the past, what experiences have you had, and where are you going in the future, what is your direction. And from my experience, the birth chart is a reflection of all of the karmas that you have accumulated up until the moment you were born, because that birth chart is a snapshot of where the planets were the moment you were born, and that only tells us what have you been up to until that point, essentially. And once you start living your life, the more conscious you become aware of the quirks and idiosyncrasies. You become aware of the problems or the strengths and weaknesses that you have. And in between birth and now, you have made choices in the present moment to either support the difficulties in your chart, or to support the strengths, or to even change your direction. So as I've been practicing meditation, Kriya Yoga, and such, what I've learned is that the present moment is a reflection of every thought, action, habit, tendency that you have experienced or put into play in the past. That's what the present moment is a reflection of. But the future is a combination. What happens in the future is a combination of the past, because there is a momentum from that, but the future is a combination of the past plus what you are doing right now, which means that if you turn away from difficult circumstances, yes, things may still persist for a while because there is a momentum behind them, but if you turn away from them and you start making choices in another direction, such as learning how to have good relationships, or how to build a successful business, or how to work through emotional issues, or become more spiritual, whatever it might be, then the actions you take now are building the future while the past exhausts itself. So I approach astrology from what I personally consider to be a yogic perspective, and it's not fatalistic at all. And why? Why do I do that? Well, many people have argued that maybe I'm just not a good astrologer. That could be true. I do put a lot of time and attention into astrology, and I do have quite a lot of repeat clients, so I don't think that's the case. But then again, I just have my own perspective. But in my experience, what I've seen, I've talked to people who have had sessions with world-renowned astrologers, people that have a reputation that pretty much anyone in an astrological community would know their name. And they come to me and they say, oh, well, this astrologer made that prediction, or this astrologer said this about me, and it really wasn't true. Even myself, I've gone and consulted with world-renowned astrologers. One of my teachers is quite a well-known astrologer, and they've made comments that helped me understand myself, helped me plan my course, but some things they said didn't happen. So does that mean they're a bad astrologer? No, they were doing their job, they were doing their duty, they were looking at the trends, they were providing information. But it doesn't always, there's more to it than just reading a static chart. If that were the case, then everything is predetermined, predestined, and why even consult an astrologer? Because what's going to happen is going to happen anyway, so there's really no point. And if that's the case, we'll just pack up shop and forget about astrology. And in the long run, that might actually be a good thing, because that will require you to develop some kind of faith or belief in a higher power and explore that and explore what you are, so you're not dependent on pieces of paper or symbols or charts or graphs. And it might sound like that I am denigrating astrology. I'm not. I'm just trying to be realistic about it. And so I see my role as a person who will look at your chart, who will consider all of the possible trends within that chart, may ask you questions to get some insight into how have you lived your life up until this point. Because you can look at one person's chart and they will respond to it much differently than another person might. This is why twins have different experiences in life often, even though there are quite a lot of similarities between twins. And this brings me to an idea of astrology and the way I feel it's meant to be practiced if it's going to be true Vedic astrology. Now, we throw around this term Vedic, and typically what do most people think it means? They think it means it's an astrology coming from an ancient land, an ancient time where the sages knew everything and they could look at a chart and map out your destiny for lifetimes, whatever it might be. But what we have to remember is that the Vedic culture, the way astrology was used in the Vedic culture, was not to say, you will be this way. This is your doom. This is your fortune. This is your fate. The Vedic culture used astrology to help plan rituals, ceremonies, spiritual sacrifices, so that you could take action at a time when the planetary energies were supportive of what you wanted to do, the direction you wanted to go in. So true Vedic astrology was not meant to be fatalistic. It was a planning tool. That's why the nakshatras are so important, the lunar zodiac, because when the moon is in a certain position and planets are in relationship to that certain position of the moon, it'll support or deny specific kinds of activities, all kinds of activities. Activities for growing, activities for destroying, activities for contracts, activities for healing. So true Vedic astrology, ancient days, wasn't about plotting out your destiny and saying this is the way it's going to be. It was about giving the culture insights into good times to take action so that the universe was as supportive as possible for success in that endeavor. And this brings us to the idea of the yugas, or the world cycles. So we have the Dark Ages, the Electric Age, the Silver Age, the Enlightened Age. And during Vedic times, we would imagine or assume that that was during the Satya Yuga, or the Age of Truth. And you can do research on this. I'm not going to go into it here. I think I went into it on another video on this channel. But the Satya Yuga is when the solar system is as close to the galactic center as possible. And so the majority of human consciousness is awake and aware and enlightened. And as we move away from that, we get a little bit darker, a little bit less aware and awake until we get to the Dark Ages, the Kali Yuga, where we aren't able to perceive the subtleties of life. The majority of the world is stuck in ignorance, essentially. And we have just come out of the Dark Ages about 300 to 400 years ago. And again, you can do your own research on this. I'm referring to Sri Yukteswar's approach to the cycles, not the larger multi-billion, trillion-year cycle, but the smaller 24,000 couplet that Sri Yukteswar talks about. And all the astrology that we have, that we practice, is typically based on the Kali Yuga, or the Dark Ages, which in that time period, it makes sense to have a fatalistic astrology. If you do any research, historical research on how the clergy were treated, witches were burned at the stake if they had knowledge of herbalism. Or women they were called witches. Priests, clergymen were given power over everything. So if they didn't like you, they could simply say, I smell the vapors of hell on you, and they would take you away and flog you, whatever it might be, or kill you. And that was a very common thing. And so it makes sense that in older cultures during the Dark Ages, that then the astrologer would become just like that, someone who would make fatalistic predictions which did not allow for the God-given right of free will, that capacity to see other opportunities, to let grace flow into one's life. It makes sense that we practice astrology that way because we are using techniques from the Kali Yuga, from the Dark Ages. And I know many of you will take issue with this, and that's okay. If you don't like these assertions, well, you don't have to listen to me. But if some people do feel that this is an accurate statement, or you can see the reason and logic behind what I'm sharing, well, then we'll probably have a good client-astrologer relationship. But we've moved into the Dwapara Yuga, the Electric Age. And again, I've discussed this in other videos, where we see the boom of technology, the boom of public health, the boom of, to be honest, people living much better, longer lives than they were 300, 400, 500, 600, 700 years ago. Just do some historical research and you'll see that this is the case. Just look around. Even people with minimum wage jobs now are living like kings compared to the serfs of the Middle Ages. But I don't want to get into that. That's a little off topic. So now we're at an age where we don't need to be fatalistic with astrology. We need to use it as, a tool to gain self-awareness. Not to say, this is who I am and I am defined by it, but to say, well, I can see these tendencies here, and I want to get some more insight into them so that I can work with them, so that I can grow beyond them. And this is where, as a yogi, as a meditator, as a Kriya Yoga teacher, if I could, I would simply say, develop a connection with Source, with God consciousness, develop a connection that is guided by inner wisdom, develop that and follow that. And that will also help you get better advice from astrologers. So when you're getting advice from astrologers, these days it's best if you don't just take it as your destiny, your fate is stamped and that's it. You need to take it as, okay, this is a possibility. Now, how can I work with this? What kind of mantras, what can I do? What kind of meditations can I do? How can I engage remedial measures such as service to the world to help break free of these karmas? If I see a difficult time period coming down the pike karmically, or the astrologer sees that, do I throw up my hands and say, oh, well, I'm going to die of a heart attack, so I might as well keep eating, fatty foods, and I might as well not exercise because I'm going to die anyway? But what the chart is showing is that possibility is there because of past habits. So now it's your turn to do your best to say, oh, well, maybe I will take care of myself. Maybe I will try harder. And so if I give advice astrologically, it's going to be based on your chart and such that it may be that in the future a certain karma is going to get activated. But if I see that pattern there, that seed that hasn't sprouted, we can talk about that, and I can say, do this mantra, volunteer for this group of people, change diet, change lifestyle, see this medical practitioner, not so that you get scared, but so that you realize, all right, I need to make a shift here. It's very similar to me saying, oh, look, there's a cliff up ahead. And so you can say, oh, look, there's a cliff up ahead, so I'm just going to keep on walking because the astrologer said I'm going to fall into it. Well, no, I'm telling you there's a cliff up ahead so that you can walk to the left or the right and go around it. That's what we're aiming for here. And thinking of this cycle of the yugas, that's where we are now, I think, in astrology. We're making great breakthroughs in astrology. And the difficulty that we have with astrology is there's not a lot of hard science around it. It hasn't been tested well. Everyone has their pet ideas. Even amongst people practicing the same kind of astrology, there's going to be differences in how they approach it, which makes it very hard to verify, to validate. But we're moving in that direction. It hasn't been treated in the same way as some of the more physical sciences. This is a metaphysical science, which we will learn how to develop as we go through this electric age, this Dwapara Yuga. But let's pretend now that we are in the Silver Age, not quite the Enlightened Age, but the next age. Well, we're going to get back to the Vedic use of astrology, which is specifically for planning. Okay, I want to go on a journey. I want to have success with my business. Astrologer, tell me when are the planets going to work perfectly, or at least as perfect as possible, to support this process. When is that going to occur? And then you would begin it at that time. Or I want to get married and I want to have the best support from the universe around me, the astrological powers around me. When should I get married? And then it'll be utilized that way. And eventually we'll probably make it to the Age of Enlightenment, the Satya Yuga, and astrology won't even be used anymore, I doubt, because no one will need it, because they'll know their direct connection to God. They'll know who they are. They won't need to look outside of themselves to find guidance and support. So we need to look at astrology in the context of history, in the context of the best way to utilize it. We also need to look at it in regards to our soul's journey in this life. We are here to learn and to grow. Yes, there is suffering in the world. No one is going to avoid that. Suffering is going to occur. There is failure in the world. It doesn't matter who you are, what you are. At some point in time, you're going to fail. Astrologers, if they're doing astrology well, in my opinion, they'll be able to see, all right, this is the cycle you're in. These are the transits. At this point in time, this is where you need to put your attention. And then the client will say, but I want to get married. When am I going to get married? And the astrologer has to be strong and say, this is not the time for relationships specifically. This is the time for you to develop your personal skills and work and career. Or the person will be married and they'll say, when am I going to find my purpose? And maybe the astrologer needs to say, well, this is not the time to be focusing too much on careers at this junction in your life. This is the time to be developing your home, your relationship, raising a family, your relationship with your spouse. That's the focus. So this is hard to do because typically, and we're all guilty of this, we want what we want when we want it, and we think that if we just can take astrology, we can have everything that we want, when that is completely and utterly denying the path, the plan, the infinite intelligence that is all around us, supporting us. We are a unique expression of this infinite intelligence. And yoga, Kriya Yoga, any authentic spiritual path is directing you towards a space of surrender. Good things come, bad things come. You know what you are. You are living a spiritual life by accepting what God brings to you. And that's a hard thing to do because there is a lot of suffering in the world. But, as we hear or read about in the Bhagavad Gita, number one, there's the idea that we are not the doer. We seem like we are the doer, that we're making things happen. But really it is God living through us. And so the first thing we need to learn how to do, yogically speaking, is get rid of this false idea that we are making things happen. We can ask for grace. We can ask for inner guidance. We can ask for greater peace so that we can understand what's being presented to us. That is our role. And that's a difficult role, but it requires meditation, surrender, prayer, grace, not necessarily astrology. In the Bhagavad Gita, it also says that we are entitled to action only, but not to the fruits of our actions, which means that we are entitled to live our life, to do our best, but we are not in control of whether it fails or succeeds. It's not up to us. That's part of God's plan, which we cannot conceive of with a human mind. We just can't. Our minds cannot process the infinite capacity, the program, if you will, of what it takes to make this universe work. So sometimes when a bad thing happens, we throw up our hands and say, God, how could you do this? Rather than considering, well, maybe there's something else going on here that I just don't understand at this point in time, but I'm just myopically focused on this grief-producing phenomena. Or maybe something really good happens, and then we think, God is pleased with me. The infinite consciousness, I'm in tune with it, I'm in harmony with it. But then we don't know. Maybe that good thing is leading to something difficult later on. This is what I mean. The vastness of the intelligence that allows us to experience this life, we really, truly cannot conceive of it as a human being. Which is why yoga and meditation are so useful, because it allows us to let go of identification with this small sense of self and to experience the all of life. We see the trees growing, we see the world, we see all the billions of people all somehow living together. And it's been going on for millions of years. So obviously it's not self-destructing. It looks that way from the outside, but the world will take care of itself. If we blow ourselves up or if we start some kind of plague, it'll all start over and life will continue. Again, there's a bigger picture here that we cannot conceive of. So point being, my goal isn't to define you fatalistically. It is to say, okay, this is the possibilities, these are the trends of your life at this point in time. I want you to understand them so that you can make choices that lead to higher fulfillment. And when I describe the planetary influences, I do so by saying these are the positive, negative things that you could experience, and these are the positive, positive things that you could experience. And so now you have a choice. And you'll recognize those things that I say, like, oh yes, I know I have that habit, I know I have that problem, so yes, I need to work with that. Or you might say, oh, I thought that this might be a good thing for me to explore, but I never really put a lot of attention to it. So it allows you to make a choice. This is about choice, not fatalism. This is how I approach it. So if you're okay with that, we'll get along well together. Now, a lot of people ask me to do 12-month reports, and essentially what do they want me to do? They want me to just spew off everything that's going to happen to them in the next 12 months. And to be honest, most people don't experience that much of a difference in their life in general. Sometimes we'll have big changes that occur, and most of the time we can see that. But again, it brings up a fatalistic viewpoint. So the way I approach 12-month reports isn't by sitting down and analyzing the entirety of your chart, because to do that takes a ridiculous amount of work. And that might sound like I'm being lazy. It's not. It's just that there are so many things to look at, so many variables to conceive, to understand, that there's no way I could do that in the amount of time that it would take to give you accurate information. So, if that troubles you, I would recommend that you find an astrologer who has very good psychic skills. I'm not psychic. I do my best to follow the trends from the chart. A good psychic astrologer will be able to look at the chart just like a tarot reader and have insights that will be very good for you. All right, but that's not me. How do I like to approach the chart? I like you to say to me, all right, this is my plan for the next 12 months or the next 5 years, whatever it might be. This is where I want to go. Does this look like I'm going to be naturally supported in this way? If not, where can I find that support, if I can find that support? Or, I'm dealing with this issue. Can you help me see any way to work with it so that I can rise above this issue? So I like to hear your goals, your expectations, and your plans. Now, why? Number one, it makes it a lot easier for me to use my time effectively researching your chart, because I can zero in specifically on that area of life and look at all the variables around that one area. That way I give better information about what you want to know versus looking generally at everything and hopefully I'm going to get something right. And I said I'm not psychic, but I do have a little bit of intuition, which is probably why clients keep wanting to work with me in that broad sense, but I'm not doing that anymore. We need to consider why also is it good to have these plans, because I know that if you have plans, if you have goals, if you're looking to the future optimistically, if you're looking into the future with possibilities, then I know you're not a fatalistic individual. You're saying, look, I've got plans in life. I kind of want to go in this direction. I want to see what's going on. Can you help me understand if this is a good time for it? And then I can do that, no problem. That's one of my favorite ways to work with an individual. So in that sense, I like to look at myself more as a coach or an analyst of future trends and give you the best advice possible in that regard. So that way we use time very efficiently. We use research very efficiently. The other thing that we need to consider is that when people come to me and they say things like, am I going to meet my soulmate? Am I going to be rich? Am I going to find my dream job? Am I going to be enlightened? I can save you a lot of time if you're going to ask me those questions, and I'm going to say no. I'm going to be right 80 to 90% of the time just by saying no whenever you ask. Am I going to be rich? Am I going to find my soulmate? Am I going to be enlightened? Or whatever the other question was too. Why is that? Because that tells me that you're not interested, probably, that's not true for everybody, but you're probably not interested in actually doing work to prepare yourself for relationships. Or you're not interested in figuring out how does money work so that I can build a successful business, so I can be wealthy. When people ask me if I'm going to be rich, most of the time what they're saying is it going to be handed to me? And if it hasn't been handed to you yet, it's probably not going to be handed to you. When people ask about their purpose, we need to consider the chart. If you are feeling scattered, and if you are feeling that you have no purpose, what does that tell me immediately? I don't even have to look at the chart to tell you this. It tells me that your chart is not coherent, that in past lifetimes you have explored so many different options that you have not focused on one thing. It's like if I try to write 10 books at a time, I'm probably not going to get any of them done. But if I focus on one, I'm going to more than likely get that book completed. So in that situation, the real question that needs to be asked is, where do you want to go? And you need to think about that before getting a session. And then you can ask, okay, these are my plans. These are my options. Maybe I want to be a teacher. Maybe I want to be a social worker. Maybe I want to be an artist. Maybe I want to be a lawyer. So, astrologer, look at my chart. And which one looks like it would be best supported in that regard? Which one looks like it has the most coherence? And if you're confused, you have to remember that it's going to be reflected in the chart. The chart's not going to point in one direction, so I'm not going to be able to say anything more than your chart's kind of a mess in that regard. But what I can say is, if you make a choice and you start cultivating the skills necessary to be successful in a chosen field, you're more than likely going to be successful in that field. Because remember, the chart is a reflection of your karma up until the time you were born. The future is a reflection of that karma plus your current choices. So if you start making choices now to be successful in a chosen field, even though you still might mess up, you still might fail, you still might not be able to make it, at least you're moving in that direction, which means you've got greater likelihood of being successful by committing to a path, which again takes me back to the idea of spirituality. When people ask about liberation of consciousness or spirituality, personally, I've seen many charts of people who have a lot of good combinations for spirituality, but they don't utilize it. They don't tap into it because they're lazy or they're not disciplined. I've seen other people who have horrible charts, but they know that if they do the hard work now, that it'll work out as they move forward in life, and they start to see those results. So this all comes back to the idea that astrology, from my perspective, again, this is going to be very different than possibly some other astrologers, but again, if you don't agree, you can find another astrologer to work with, is meant about providing trends in the same way that a doctor can do an analysis of blood work, whatever it might be, and give you a prognosis. But maybe the actions you take, your own particular genetics, doesn't go that way. Does that make the doctor a bad doctor? No, he or she was seeing trends. Same thing about financial advisors. Anyone who gives you advice, it's the same kind of thing. All right, so we need to remember this about astrology. I take astrology very seriously, but I also look at it with a very skeptical eye. I love astrology. I find that it is extremely enlightening in regards to understanding how the universe functions, how all our experiences function. But I have found over the years that typically when we have a fatalistic person or even a fatalistic astrologer, why do things work out the way the fatalistic astrologer or the fatalistic person, those predictions that are made? Because of self-fulfilling prophecies. because of self-fulfilling prophecies. There have been many things that astrologers have told me that, yes, I had difficulties in certain areas, or I had natural skills in certain areas, but I was able to make the best of those situations by thinking about how can I make the best of these situations. Now, if I would have thrown up my arms and said, oh, well, the astrologer said this, so therefore that's going to happen, I could see how I could create that for myself, and then I'd say, see, it's right. Okay, so we have to remember this. It's a guiding tool. And ultimately, this is why I have some difficulty practicing astrology, because I don't want you to throw away your capacity to understand grace in this world. I don't want you to throw away your capacity to tap into and utilize divine will, to master your consciousness. I want you to develop those things, which is why, if I can, I'm going to direct you to a meditation practice or a spiritual practice or a book or a coach or some kind of guide or counselor that can help you see through the illusion of your false sense of self and to start imagining a better reality for you. That's the key in my mind, okay? Because what your vision is, that's where you're going to go one way or the other. If you want to be a successful engineer and your chart says it's not going to happen in this life, well, should you not do it then? No, you want to be a successful engineer. So you put your attention towards being a successful engineer, and maybe you die before that finally happens. But you start the next lifetime with some positive karma, and so now it's easier for you to be a successful engineer. The same thing with finances, the same thing with spirituality. Don't say, does my chart show that I'm going to be enlightened? If you want to be enlightened, then find someone to teach you the techniques, the processes that contribute to that, study the proper materials, and work towards it. You may succeed in 2 months. Who knows? Something special could happen. It may take you 3 lifetimes, but that's not the point. The point is you need to go in the direction you want to go in, commit yourself to it, and eventually you'll get there, one way or the other. But always remembering that everyone, everywhere, everything fails from time to time. And what's the difference between someone who's successful and the person who's not? The person who is successful learned from their failures or just continued, persisted. All right? And we have to remember that we cannot understand the full scope of consciousness. It's beyond our human mind, our human capacity, which is why the practice of yoga meditation is so beautiful, so wonderful, because it allows you to surrender into that knowing. It allows you to surrender into a greater intelligence, and that's where you find peace. Now, it doesn't mean you give up your willpower. It means that you learn to have a responsive communication between your small self and your bigger self, God, divine consciousness, divine mother, whatever you want to call it. And you learn to develop that. And then you gain greater understanding. You gain wisdom. So you start to know whether a success or a failure is really that big of a deal or not. And then eventually you don't even worry about success and failure because you are surrendered into the process. So this is why I sometimes have difficulty doing astrology, because honestly, while astrology has been a beautiful gift for myself to understand people, to understand cultures, to understand the bigger picture of life, really, beyond that, meditation, higher contemplation, this has been the real gem of life. Because then, in a sense, you rise above your addiction to having to know for certain what's going to happen. And that's why a lot of people seek out astrology, because they want to know something for certain, and nothing is certain. Nothing is certain. There's possibilities, there's trends. Some things are stronger than others, meaning sometimes you look at a person's chart and it's kind of obvious that they're going to go in a certain direction, but that's rare, because just people who are one-pointed and focused, they are rare in and of themselves. So if you can resonate with this approach, and you're willing to work with an astrologer who's not going to tell you this is the way it's going to be, but will say these are the trends, these are the potential pitfalls, the potential pros, the potential cons, these are potential positive things that you need to put your awareness towards, and then live your life as an adventure, not as predestination, but as an adventure. Surrendering to a higher power, learning to communicate with that higher power, learning to see all of your experiences not just as a reflection of a little you who's in an alien world that's come here to suffer, but as part of a greater whole. If you're willing to explore that, then I'm happy to consider working with you. Now, a few final things. I do look at a person's chart to see if I have compatibility with them as a client. Just doing a lot of relationship compatibility, I've seen this to be the case where sometimes my approach or my understanding of astrology or the things I'm going to say or the way I present it won't really resonate with a certain individual. So I'll refer you to an astrologer that will resonate with you, because I want you to get the knowledge you're looking for, but it may not be through me. But you can trust that the people I refer you to, they're either students of mine or they're colleagues that I have known for quite a while, that I know how they work, and I know that they're probably going to be able to speak to you a little bit better than I can. And this is the way you should look at anyone, whether it's a mechanic, a doctor, again, a financial advisor, a priest, a psychological counselor. You need someone that you can develop rapport with, okay? Not just because you think that this is the best person who does astrology. I also do audio recordings primarily. Why do I do that? Because it's very efficient. When I used to do astrology, doing personal sessions, it took a lot of time. I was mainly listening to the other person talk a bit more rather than actually giving them the specific information. So I do audio sessions now so that I can give you very concise, to the point information based on the questions you ask. Now, you may have read that I do certain tiers of astrology, like different levels. Well, how does that work? Well, first of all, once we decide that we want to work together, I will find out, what do you want to know? All right, and in the email that you probably would get once you set up an appointment, it'll describe the cost of an initial session, a full birth chart reading, where I look at the entirety of your chart and do my best to synthesize it to share your past karmas and how it might play out in the future. It's a certain set fee. After that, if you aren't looking for that kind of session, I want to know what are you wanting to understand. And then essentially I look at your chart to figure out what is going to be required, how much research is going to be required to do that, how much time is going to be required to do that. And I will give you, or my secretary will give you, a quote on how much that's going to, what the fee will be for that. And that's going to be different for everybody, just in the same way that sometimes you might only need to change a tire versus have your whole engine rebuilt if you go to a mechanic. So it's based on what are your needs, and that will be specific to you. And if you want to move forward, we will do that. Follow-up sessions are hour-long recordings. That's would be the third tier. So at this point in time, this is how I'm doing my sessions. I want to give you information that's specific to your needs. It's going to be tailored to what your questions are. And when it comes to predictions, while I've done very good predictions in the past, which is one of the reasons why I'm booked out 3 to 4 months, I can't keep doing that based on my personal vision of astrology. That's what people wanted, and so I did my best to work with them. But now, after much meditating on it, I can't do that anymore. So I will give you trends and possibilities and help encourage you how to work with those things rather than proclaiming your doom or your fortune, because that ultimately is between you, your actions, your thoughts, your emotions, and the divine consciousness and your connection to that. Okay. So I believe that covers all the things I wanted to go over. Yeah, that should do it. So thank you for listening and paying attention. And if you want to move forward with an astrological session, don't hesitate to email us at astroinfo@ashevillevedicastrology.com. You'll probably get an autoresponder because we do get quite a lot of emails. And it will tell you how long of a wait there probably will be. You can leave your birth date, time, and location so I can see what our compatibility is. And then after that, we can determine what kind of work do you need and what might the fees be involved and when can I deliver that to you. And again, know that there might be a significant wait just because I have a lot of repeat clients that I see, as well as a lot of clients every day, more clients than I can really handle in a few months. So I have to work with my time as best I can. There's only one of me, which is why if you don't want to wait, I'd like to recommend that you email Channing Ayers. Her email address is at ashevillevedicastrology.com under the Vedic Astrologers tab. You can set up a session with her. Maybe she can see you sooner. Karen White of Divine Time Astrology, Corey Dowds of eyeoftheveda.com, Michael Reed of Authentic Astrology, Kara Cottrell, karacottrell.com. All these are wonderful astrologers, and they'll be able to help you immensely. And if one can't see you sooner, then the other one should be able to. So you have enough resources that you can get what you need, hopefully when you need it. But I'd like to encourage you to also just try to learn about astrology, because that can open up your eyes to some pretty profound insights into yourself, into the world, into the greater consciousness. So if you like, consider exploring astrology, consider learning about it yourself. If you go to AshevilleVedicAstrology.com, under the MP3 audio and video courses, you'll see all kinds of classes, MP3 classes that you can download to get you started. Or you can email us and we can put your name on a mailing list and let you know when we have classes, because we do that about twice a year, very bigger classes. I call them the spring semester and fall semester. And we have some smaller classes from time to time that are webinars. They're all webinars, so they're all from the comfort of your home. Typically we use GoToMeeting. So you've got a lot of options. So thank you for tuning in and considering this. I look forward to hearing from you. If you know any friends or colleagues that would also benefit from my approach to astrology, send them over. So be well, and thank you very much. Peace.